Christ, his Son. That's the end of the night, arises at the usual time, and assumes his usual responsibilities in laboring. But out in the fields, apparently in an apple orchard, he is so weak, his natural strength so drained, that he looks bad. And both Hiram and his father notice and say, "Joseph, are you all right?" And then the father says, "You'd better go back into the house." He starts back, he climbs over a fence, he's weak and falls, and while he's there, again Moroni appears and again delivers the same message. Now, one of the intimate details about father-son is that he's been instructed to tell his father of all this, and he doesn't. And he's later reprimanded by Moroni, in effect saying, "Why didn't you tell your father? I didn't think he'd believe me." And Moroni says, "He will believe every word you say." He goes to his father, he tells him what has happened, and his father says, "Look at the trust in this. Joseph, my son, do not be disobedient to this heavenly vision." Or in our words, do exactly what he told you to do. His father, in that sense, is the first convert to the process of restoration. And Joseph did as he was directed. After this first night of interviews with Moroni, there is record of at least 23 subsequent visitations when Moroni comes and further instructs and counsels and teaches Joseph Smith. He was literally his tutor. He had a full semester of training and apparently was an apt student. Moroni was not the only personage who had lived in this world and who had been given heavy responsibilities in the processes of salvation. Each dispensation, using the language of Paul, had had its prime leaders and its patriarchs and its prophets. And in every time this has happened, sooner or later there is decline, and often the ancient prophets were subject to persecution and many times death. Among those who somehow became known to the prophet, and he was not imagining them or simply trying after reading about them to understand, among those, in addition to Moroni, that he came to know intimately were the three apostles who led in the New Testament era, Peter, James, and John, and of ancients who preceded them. He seemed to know Adam. He seemed to know at least about, intimately, Noah, Enoch, the later ministry of Abraham, after him, Moses, and after him, the others who were in the period down to the meridian of time. John Taylor says that Joseph Smith seemed as familiar with these persons as we are with one another. So the totality of the prophets, patriarchs, and apostles were, in Joseph Smith's experience, real persons, no question about their existence, and were united. And he even said it this way: they are not idle spectators, they are joining hands with us here on earth to bring to pass this glorious work. When Hiram was looking back on the lives they lived side by side, in 1844, he said, "There were prophets before, but Joseph has the spirit and power of all the prophets." And as you study his life and compare it to those we know about in the past, there are elements in all of their lives that were relived in his life. It was the custom of the time for the oldest member of the family, in this case it would have been Alvin, to help build a family home. And as the Smiths looked forward to that, he began a frame house which wasn't finished until after his death. Alvin, being the oldest, was in some ways also the leader among the children, deeply beloved, strong, and able, and also a very wise son. And it was a shock to the entire family when suddenly, after he is ill and the doctors administer an overdose of calomel, he develops gangrene in his colon, and in 4 days he was gone. The last words he says are, in effect, Joseph, be faithful to obtain the record. Joseph is by now 17 or so. And he adds, be a good boy. You can say that the older brother still thinks of his youngest brother as a little boy, but he also knows what the Lord has placed upon him. And that's his dying word. It's also, in effect, a dying blessing. One can wonder what might have happened in the fortunes of the Smith family if Alvin had lived and could have offered his strength in every way to the project. But prematurely, he was taken away. And there's another footnote to that, which is, how did Joseph Sr., the father, feel when the prophet breaks into him late in life and says, we have learned that we can perform vicarious ordinances for our loved ones. And instantly, Joseph Sr. says, be baptized for Alvin. And they were. So Alvin was in the hearts of all of his siblings and sorely missed. Alvin's desire to build a better home for his folks was based on the feeling that they deserved a better place and that perhaps they could retire and wouldn't have to work as hard as they had through their life. So it was in 1825 that the home was finally finished, and Mother Smith and her husband actually looked at a room in that house and said, this is where we can now take it a little easier. Little did they know what was ahead in their lives.